My wife cheated on me when I had an accident and became disabled. She thought it was forever, so she left me for her lover. But when I got back on my feet, she begged me to forgive her. When Susan left, it wasn't the yelling or the slamming door that haunted me. It was the silence afterward. The kind of silence that fills a house when it's suddenly too empty, the air too heavy, like a vacuum had sucked all the noise out and left me stranded in my thoughts. I sat there, wheels of my chair locked in place, staring at the divorce papers she had thrown onto the kitchen counter. She thought it was over for me, for us. I had been in this chair for less than 6 months, but that was all it took for her to decide she wasn't built for this. The woman I thought I knew, who had once danced barefoot with me in the rain, walked away without looking back. Her heels echoed on the driveway, and I swear, even my heartbeat synced to that fading rhythm. It was like the world was saying, "This chapter's done." But life wasn't done with me yet. And neither was she. We weren't a perfect couple, but we made sense. I met Susan at a 4th of July barbecue when I was 25. She wore this red sundress that made her stand out like a firework against the green lawn. I was just some guy with a steady job as an electrician and a love for fixing things. We clicked over beer and burgers, and within a year, we were married. By the time of the accident, we had built a life that felt solid. We had a little house, 2 cars, and matching coffee mugs with corny, his, and hers, labels. Life was ordinary in the best way. Until the morning it wasn't. I was running late for work, like any other Monday. The roads were slick from a light drizzle the night before, and traffic was backed up. I remember glancing at the clock on the dash, mentally calculating if I'd still make it on time. That's when I saw the other car, speeding, veering straight into my lane. The crash felt like someone had yanked me out of reality and thrown me into a movie stunt gone wrong. The sound of crunching metal, the airbag slamming into me, and then, nothing. Black. When I woke up in the hospital, tubes and machines surrounded me like I'd become a part of them. The doctor's face was grim when he told me I had a spinal injury and might never walk again. I thought of Susan, of the house we built, of how I'd planned to teach our future kids how to ride bikes. All of it came crashing down in an instant. But Susan was there at first. She visited every day for the first 2 weeks, sitting by my side, holding my hand. She told me we'd figure it out, that I wasn't alone. I clung to those words like a lifeline. But as the weeks dragged on, her visits became less frequent, her tone more clipped, and then one day, she didn't show up at all. I tried to convince myself that Susan was just busy. After all, she had a job to hold down and bills to pay while I was stuck in that hospital bed, useless and angry. But even when she did show up, she wasn't the same. She didn't bring flowers or my favorite takeout like she used to. Instead, she sat at the edge of the chair, scrolling through her phone. She hardly looked at me anymore. Conversations became one-sided, me asking questions and her giving short, distant answers. "Can you bring me those photos from the house next time?" I asked once, hoping a glimpse of our life before the accident might spark something between us again. "I'll see if I have time," she said without looking up. I didn't know it yet, but the distance wasn't just emotional, it was physical. I found out later that while I was stuck in bed, struggling to adjust to the reality of my new body, she was meeting him. My friends were the first to notice. "Hey man," one of them said during a rare visit to the hospital. "I saw Susan at the cafe downtown the other day. She was with some guy. Seemed cozy." I brushed it off, told myself they were wrong, that Susan wouldn't do that to me. We had been through too much together, hadn't we? But doubt has a way of digging into your mind, eating away at you like termites in wood. The day she brought the divorce papers was the day my denial ended. She stood by the hospital window, her arms folded across her chest. "This isn't the life I want," she said. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this. You're going to be like this forever, and I'm still young." I stared at her, unable to believe the words coming out of her mouth. "We said for better or worse, Susan. Was that just something you said to fill the silence at our wedding?" She didn't answer. Instead, she left the papers on the counter and walked out of the room. It was like I was dying all over again, but this time, no one was trying to save me. After the divorce, there wasn't much left of me. I couldn't stay in the house, not with its walls still holding the echoes of Susan's laughter, or the lingering smell of her perfume on the sheets. I signed away everything in the settlement, what little we had. She didn't take much, but she didn't have to. She had already taken the future I thought we'd have. With nowhere else to go, I moved back in with my parents. 35 years old, living in my childhood bedroom, needing help to get dressed some mornings. It was humiliating. I had always been the guy who could fix things, but now I couldn't even fix myself. Mom tried to make it feel normal. She'd bring me breakfast in bed, telling me stories about her customers at the flower shop. My dad built a ramp out back so I could get fresh air when I needed to. But I hated it. I hated that they had to do it. I hated that I needed them. The days blurred together, each one a repeat of the last. Physical therapy sessions were grueling. The therapists pushed me harder than I thought possible, and I hated them for it, too. There were moments when I just wanted to tell them to stop, to leave me in my chair and let me rot. But deep down, there was something else, something stubborn and angry that refused to give up. Maybe it was revenge. Maybe it was pride. I didn't know at the time. All I knew was that I couldn't let this be the end of my story. Slowly, progress came. At first, I could only wiggle my toes, which felt like a useless party trick. But then, my legs responded, just barely. Standing with assistance felt like conquering Everest. It took months, but eventually, I moved from a wheelchair to crutches. My body was weak, but my spirit wasn't. One day, during a therapy session, I managed to take 3 shaky steps on my own. My therapist clapped, but I didn't smile. I just stared at my legs, thinking, this isn't over. Not yet. While I was learning to walk again, Susan was building her new life with him. I heard bits and pieces through mutual friends. He was rich, older, and had no kids of his own. She didn't waste any time moving into his place. Financially, she was set. Emotionally? I wasn't so sure. But I didn't care. Or at least, I didn't think I did. It wasn't overnight, but things began to shift. I stopped counting the days since Susan left and started counting the steps I could take without crutches. 3 became 10. 10 became 20. I still limped, but every step was a small victory. My parents saw the change before I did. Mom stopped hovering as much, and Dad started cracking jokes again, like he knew I was finally coming back to life. I even reconnected with some old friends. The ones who stuck by me, who didn't just see me as the guy in a wheelchair, became my lifeline. The biggest change, though, came when I picked up a hammer again. My dad needed help fixing the garage door, and without thinking, I grabbed the toolbox. My hands were shaky, but they remembered the work. Something inside me reignited. I had spent so much time thinking of myself as broken that I forgot I could still build. I started taking on odd jobs around the house, small repairs, patching drywall, fixing leaky faucets. It felt good, like I was reclaiming a part of myself that I thought was gone. And when an old buddy from my contracting days offered me a small gig remodeling a kitchen, I didn't hesitate. The pay wasn't much, but it wasn't about the money. It was about proving to myself that I was more than my injury, more than Susan's rejection. As the weeks turned into months, I grew stronger. The limp was still there, but it didn't slow me down. By the time I finished my 3rd job, I had enough saved to start thinking about my own place again. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. Then, one evening, after a long day of work, my phone buzzed with a message that made my stomach drop. Susan, hey, can we talk? I was already sitting in the booth when she walked in, her heels clicking softly against the tile floor. Susan hesitated by the entrance before spotting me. She looked different, thinner, maybe, or just worn down. But I wasn't here to notice the details. She slid into the seat across from me, tucking her hair behind her ear. Hi, she said, her voice soft. I leaned back. Hi. For a moment neither of us spoke. She fiddled with the edge of the menu, then set it down. You're walking again, she said. I am. She smiled faintly, but it quickly faded. I wasn't sure you'd ever. Her voice trailed off. Neither were you, I said flatly. She flinched but didn't argue. I've missed you, she whispered. I let out a breath and leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. What do you want, Susan? I want us to talk, she said quickly, as if she had rehearsed it. I've made mistakes. I know that. But I didn't realize how much until recently. I tilted my head, watching her squirm. Realize what, exactly? That I gave up on you too soon, she said, her voice cracking. I was scared, and I didn't know what to do. But seeing you now, on your feet, moving forward, It reminded me of what we had. I want that back. I laughed, the sound bitter. You want it back now that I'm not a burden anymore. That's convenient. Her eyes widened. That's not fair. Fair? I leaned in closer. You left me when I couldn't even stand on my own 2 feet, Susan. You handed me divorce papers while I was still in a hospital gown. I panicked, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought you'd never recover. I thought our life was over, and I didn't know how to be the person you needed. You didn't try. Her lip trembled. I'm trying now. Why now? I pressed. What's changed? She hesitated, looking down at her hands. Things with him, they're not what I thought they'd be. He doesn't care about me, not really. I thought the money and stability would make everything easier, but it's just made me feel empty. I miss you. I miss us. There it was. The truth laid out, raw and desperate. But instead of feeling pity, I felt anger simmering under my skin. You miss me? I said, my voice sharp. Or do you miss the idea of me, the guy who would have done anything for you before you threw him away? I didn't throw you away, she said, her voice rising. I was scared, and I made a mistake. Can't you understand that? Oh, I understand perfectly. I sat back, shaking my head. I understand that when things got hard you ran. And now that I'm standing again, you think you can waltz back into my life like nothing happened. Her eyes glistened with tears. I loved you. I still love you. I know I don't deserve it, but if there's any part of you that still feels the same, please stop. My voice cut through her plea like a knife. You don't get to play that card. Love isn't what you felt when you left me for someone richer. Love isn't abandoning someone when they're at their lowest. She wiped her eyes, her breath hitching. I know. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I thought you'd never recover. I thought I was making the right choice for both of us. And now you think you're making the right choice by coming back? I laughed again, the sound cold. You didn't come here because you love me, Susan. You came here because you realized you made a bad bet, and now you're scrambling to fix it. That's not true, she cried, her voice breaking. I realized what I lost. I realized I can't live without you. I stared at her, the woman I had once built a life with, now a stranger begging for scraps of what we used to be. I waited for the part of me that still longed for her to speak up, to convince me that maybe, just maybe, she deserved another chance. But there was nothing. Just the quiet certainty that she didn't belong in my life anymore. I stood up, sliding out of the booth. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Please, she whispered. I shook my head. You lost me the day you left, Susan. Walk away. Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't stay to watch. I turned and walked out of the diner, not looking back. The night air hit me like a slap as I stepped out of the diner. I didn't stop. I didn't think. My feet carried me to the truck, my breathing steady but heavy, as if I'd just finished running a marathon. I pulled the door open, slid into the driver's seat, and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Susan again. I pulled it out, stared at her name glowing on the screen. I could hear her voice in my head. I miss you. I made a mistake. Please give me another chance. The phone stopped buzzing. The silence that followed was deafening. My thumb hovered over her contact. I didn't hesitate this time. Delete. She was gone. Her name vanished from my screen, as if she had never been there. But the weight I had carried for months was still there, until I exhaled, a breath I didn't know I had been holding. I leaned back in the seat and looked out the windshield. The stars were out, bright and steady. For the first time since the accident, I felt like one of them, still scarred, but shining all the same. The phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't her. It was my dad. Pancakes tomorrow? I smiled, the smallest hint of peace creeping in. Yeah, I replied. I'll be there. I started the engine, leaving the diner, the conversation, and Susan behind me. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, casting a soft glow across the room. I sat up, the stiffness in my legs reminding me that progress didn't come without effort. But today, the ache didn't bother me, it felt earned. Downstairs, the smell of coffee and pancakes drifted through the air. I made my way to the kitchen, leaning on my crutch just enough to keep steady. My mom stood by the stove, flipping pancakes, while my dad read the morning paper. Morning, I said, sliding into a chair. My dad looked up, smirking. You're actually up before noon. Must be a special occasion. I chuckled, taking a sip of coffee. Something like that. My mom set a plate in front of me, and as I dug into the pancakes, I realized how different everything felt. The bitterness, the anger, it wasn't weighing me down anymore. I wasn't thinking about Susan, her betrayal, or what could have been. For the first time in months, I was thinking about what could be. What's the plan for today? My mom asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Work on the shed, I said. Then maybe go for a walk. My dad raised an eyebrow. You sure you're not overdoing it? Probably, I said with a grin. But it's time. I finished breakfast, grabbed my jacket, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the kind that wakes you up and reminds you that life goes on. As I looked out over the backyard, I felt it in my bones. I was ready to rebuild, not just the shed, but my life. One step at a time.